What if I told you that most people today are living in quiet defeat, not because they are weak, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've surrendered control without ever realizing it? They wake up tired, already anxious, already reacting to messages, opinions, expectations and pressures that were never theirs to carry. They believe life is happening to them, instead of understanding how much of it is shaped by what they allow into their mind. This silent erosion doesn't happen overnight. It happens through constant comparison, emotional dependence, and the need for validation from a world that never stops demanding more. And the tragedy is that most people mistake this exhaustion for normal life. The brutal truth is this: the more you emotionally invest in things outside your control, other people's reactions, past mistakes, future outcomes, the weaker your inner foundation becomes. Ancient Stoics understood something modern society has forgotten. Peace is not found by controlling the world, but by mastering your response to it. Yet today, we've built entire identities around being liked, approved of, noticed, and admired. If this message resonates with you even slightly, pause for a moment and like this video, because the algorithm may forget it, but your mind won't. Most people don't fail loudly. They fail quietly. They tolerate situations that drain them. They stay in mental loops of resentment, regret, and imagined futures. They replay conversations that already ended and fear outcomes that haven't happened. This constant mental noise keeps them reactive, emotionally fragile, and dependent on circumstances aligning perfectly before they feel okay. Stoic discipline teaches the opposite. Strength is built by removing unnecessary emotional attachments. Not everything deserves your reaction. Not everything deserves your energy. Here's something uncomfortable most people never confront. Suffering is often self-inflicted. Not the event itself, but the meaning we attach to it. Two people can experience the same loss, rejection, or failure, and one grows sharper while the other collapses. The difference is interpretation. Stoicism doesn't promise comfort, it offers clarity. It strips away illusions and forces you to see reality without emotional distortion. If you're finding value here, share this video with someone who feels stuck in their own head. They may not say it, but they need to hear this. Another hard reality is this: modern society rewards emotional exposure, but punishes emotional discipline. You're encouraged to vent, overshare, and relive pain publicly, yet rarely taught how to sit with discomfort privately and transmute it into strength. Stoics didn't suppress emotion, they trained it. They understood that unchecked emotion doesn't make you human, it makes you predictable. And predictability is weakness in a chaotic world. Most people wait for motivation before taking control of their lives. Stoicism teaches you to act first and let emotion catch up later. Discipline creates confidence. Consistency creates calm. When you build a life around principles instead of moods, you stop being shaken by every inconvenience. You become grounded, unmovable, mentally sovereign. And if this mindset is something you want more of, subscribe to PsychoVest, because this channel exists to sharpen minds, not soothe egos. There's a reason emotionally resilient people seem calm, while others spiral. They've accepted that life owes them nothing. Once you release entitlement, frustration loses its grip. Once you stop demanding fairness from reality, disappointment fades. Stoicism isn't pessimistic, it's liberating. It teaches you that peace is portable. It doesn't depend on people behaving well, plans working out, or circumstances being ideal. It depends on how little power you give to what lies beyond your control. Most people are exhausted, not from doing too much, but from caring about too many things that don't matter. Every opinion, every insult, every delay becomes a personal attack. Stoic thinking asks a simple question before reacting. Is this within my control? If the answer is no, emotional engagement becomes optional. And when reaction becomes optional, freedom begins. Many never realize that mental strength isn't about becoming harder. It's about becoming clearer. Clear about values, clear about priorities, clear about what deserves attention and what deserves silence. When clarity increases, anxiety decreases. When purpose sharpens, distraction weakens. This is why Stoic principles feel brutal. They don't comfort illusions, they dismantle them. And once illusions fall, there's no going back to mental slavery. Most people never stop to question why their mind feels overcrowded. They blame stress, trauma, relationships, or bad luck, but rarely confront the real source, unchecked mental indulgence. Every thought is treated as important, every emotion is obeyed, every impulse is justified. Stoic discipline begins where indulgence ends. It teaches you that thoughts are not commands, emotions are not truths, and discomfort is not danger. The mind, when left untrained, behaves like a spoiled ruler, demanding attention, gratification, and constant reassurance. When trained, it becomes a tool instead of a tyrant. There is a dangerous lie modern culture repeats endlessly, that feeling deeply means living deeply. In reality, most people aren't feeling deeply. They're reacting shallowly, over and over again. They confuse emotional intensity with meaning. Stoicism exposes this illusion by asking you to slow down your reactions until they lose their power over you. When you stop reacting instantly, you start responding intentionally. That gap between stimulus and response is where mental dominance is forged. Many people say they want peace, but what they actually want is control over outcomes. Stoicism teaches you that peace comes from surrendering outcomes, not manipulating them. You can do everything right and still lose. You can give your best and still be rejected. You can prepare endlessly and still fail. The untrained mind sees this as injustice. The Stoic mind sees it as reality. And once you accept reality fully, resistance disappears, and with it, most suffering. Another uncomfortable truth: most people are addicted to being offended. They draw identity from emotional wounds. They replay them, nurture them, protect them. Pain becomes familiar, even comforting, because it provides a narrative. Stoicism threatens this addiction by removing the drama. It doesn't deny pain, it refuses to romanticize it. It asks you to extract the lesson, discard the story, and move forward stronger, quieter, and less visible. Notice how rare silence has become. Silence now feels awkward, even threatening, because it exposes unresolved thoughts. Stoics valued silence because it revealed truth. When you're quiet long enough, your mind shows you what you've been avoiding. That's why stillness feels uncomfortable at first. It strips away distractions and leaves you alone with responsibility. Responsibility for your choices, your reactions, your direction. Most people run from this. Stoics run toward it. There's a reason emotionally disciplined people don't announce their strength. Power that needs to be displayed is fragile. True mental resilience is subtle. It shows up in restraint, patience, and the ability to walk away without explaining yourself. Stoicism teaches that dignity isn't loud, self-respect doesn't argue, and confidence doesn't demand acknowledgement. Most people fear losing things, status, relationships, comfort, without realizing that fear itself keeps them enslaved. Stoic philosophy asks you to rehearse loss mentally, not to become cold, but to become prepared. When you've already accepted the possibility of loss, it loses its power to control you. You stop clinging. You stop negotiating your values for approval. You stop living defensively. The greatest psychological shift happens when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What does this require of me?" That single question transforms victimhood into agency. It turns chaos into training. Every inconvenience becomes resistance. Every setback becomes conditioning. Life stops being an enemy and starts becoming a forge. Most people wait for life to calm down before they become disciplined. Stoicism reverses that logic. You become disciplined so life no longer shakes you. The storm doesn't need to stop. You need to become stable inside it. When your internal state no longer depends on external order, you become mentally untouchable. And here's what few will ever tell you. Once you begin living this way, some people will feel uncomfortable around you. Not because you're cruel, but because you're no longer reactive. You no longer feed emotional chaos. You no longer participate in needless drama. This quiet independence threatens people who rely on emotional exchange to feel relevant. Stoicism is not about isolating yourself from the world. It's about standing in it without being consumed by it. It's about walking through noise without absorbing it. About caring deeply but selectively. About choosing meaning over mood, principle over impulse, clarity over comfort. We're not done yet. Most people believe strength looks like intensity, passion, aggression, emotional expression. But Stoicism reveals a quieter form of power that doesn't announce itself. It's the strength to pause when insulted, to remain composed when misunderstood, to keep moving forward when recognition never comes. This kind of strength unsettles people because it removes leverage. When someone realizes they can no longer provoke you, control you, or emotionally steer you, they lose interest, or they grow hostile. Either way, you gain clarity about who benefits from your instability. There is a hidden cost to constant emotional exposure that few acknowledge. It trains your nervous system to live in urgency. When everything feels important, nothing truly is. Stoic discipline reorders importance. It teaches you to reserve emotional energy for what aligns with your values, not for fleeting opinions or temporary discomforts. Over time, this creates an inner hierarchy where peace sits at the top, not pleasure, not validation, not excitement. And once peace becomes your priority, many distractions simply lose their appeal. Most people are exhausted because they negotiate with themselves all day. They debate whether to act, whether to speak up, whether to endure discomfort or avoid it. Stoicism simplifies this mental chaos by replacing endless deliberation with principle-based action. When your standards are clear, decisions become lighter. You don't need motivation when commitment is already decided. You don't need reassurance when your direction is rooted in values rather than feelings. One of the most radical Stoic ideas is this: you don't control how people perceive you, and trying to is a form of bondage. The moment you release the need to be understood, approved of, or validated, your behavior becomes cleaner and more honest. You stop performing. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking or exaggerating yourself to fit the emotional expectations of others. What remains is something rare: authentic restraint. People often confuse Stoicism with emotional numbness, but that's a misunderstanding born from emotional excess. Stoics feel fully, but they choose when, where, and why those feelings are expressed. Emotion becomes intentional, not reactive. This distinction matters. A reactive person is predictable. A disciplined person is adaptable. And adaptability, not intensity, is what allows someone to endure long-term pressure without breaking. There's a moment in every Stoic journey where discomfort stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like information. Fatigue becomes feedback. Resistance becomes instruction. Pain becomes a teacher instead of an enemy. At that point, life no longer feels like a series of obstacles. It feels like a structured test, one that sharpens instead of diminishes. This shift doesn't make life easier. It makes you stronger. Most people unconsciously outsource their emotional state to circumstances. A good day depends on praise. A bad day depends on conflict. Stoicism severs that dependency. It asks you to become the source of your own stability. When your inner state no longer rises and falls with external events, you gain something priceless: continuity. You remain yourself across changing conditions. You don't fragment under pressure. There is a deep confidence that comes from knowing you can endure discomfort without collapsing into bitterness or self-pity. This confidence doesn't shout. It steadies. It doesn't dominate. It grounds. And once you experience it, you realize how much of your previous anxiety came from the belief that you couldn't handle what life might demand of you. Stoic training also changes how you relate to time. Regret loses its grip because the past becomes fixed, instructive, and finished. Anxiety weakens because the future becomes uncertain but irrelevant to your present action. All that remains is now, what you can do, how you can respond, and whether your behavior aligns with your principles. This present-focused clarity is where momentum is born. Many never realize that mental freedom is not about escaping hardship. It's about refusing to be defined by it. Stoicism teaches you to carry hardship without letting it spill into identity. You experience pain without becoming broken. You experience loss without becoming small. You experience struggle without surrendering dignity. And once you internalize this way of thinking, something irreversible happens. You stop seeking shortcuts to peace. You stop chasing emotional highs. You stop believing comfort is the goal. You begin to understand that strength is built slowly, quietly, through repeated acts of self-command. Most people never notice the moment they give up authority over their own mind. It doesn't happen during a crisis. It happens during comfort. It happens when you stop questioning your reactions, when you allow habits to replace intention, when you tell yourself that tomorrow you'll regain control. Stoicism forces you to confront this drift. It reminds you that mental decay is subtle and discipline must be deliberate. Without daily awareness, your thoughts default to fear, comparison, and self-doubt. Not because you're flawed, but because untrained minds always move toward disorder. There is a dangerous belief that suffering automatically builds character. It doesn't. Suffering without reflection builds resentment. Stoics didn't glorify pain, they studied it. They asked what it revealed, what it demanded, and what it stripped away. When pain removes illusions, it strengthens. When it reinforces narratives of victimhood, it weakens. The difference lies in interpretation, and interpretation is one of the few things fully within your control. Many people think they're overwhelmed by life, when in reality they're overwhelmed by their own expectations of how life should be. Stoicism removes the fantasy version of reality and replaces it with acceptance, not passive resignation, but active alignment. When you stop demanding that reality match your preferences, your mental resistance collapses. Energy once spent complaining becomes available for action. Clarity replaces outrage. Endurance replaces emotional collapse. There's a reason Stoic teachings feel uncomfortable at first. They strip away excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances when your reactions are exposed as choices. You can no longer hide behind personality traits or past wounds. This accountability feels heavy, but it's also liberating, because once responsibility is reclaimed, power returns. You stop waiting for permission to be stable. You stop needing conditions to improve before you do. Most people don't realize how much of their identity is built around emotional reactivity. They know who they are by what angers them, hurts them, or excites them. Stoicism dissolves these fragile identities by grounding you in values instead of emotions. Values don't fluctuate daily. They don't panic. They don't need reassurance. When values guide behavior, emotional chaos loses its authority. One of the hardest lessons is learning that not every thought deserves engagement. The mind generates noise constantly. Doubts, fears, comparisons, imagined threats. Stoic discipline doesn't argue with every thought. It observes and discards most of them. This selective attention is what creates mental quiet. Peace is not the absence of thought. It's the ability to ignore what doesn't serve your direction. As this practice deepens, something shifts internally. You stop reacting immediately. You pause. You assess. That pause becomes your greatest advantage. In a world addicted to instant reaction, the person who can delay response gains leverage. They see patterns others miss. They avoid traps others fall into. They move deliberately, while others exhaust themselves emotionally. Another uncomfortable realization emerges. Many people around you benefit from your emotional volatility. Chaos keeps dynamics predictable. Drama creates engagement. When you become composed, detached, and internally stable, some relationships weaken, not because you've changed for the worse, but because you're no longer playing a role that served others' emotional needs. Stoicism prepares you for this warning. Growth often brings solitude before it brings respect. There is a deep calm that comes from knowing you can endure discomfort without rushing to escape it. When you stop treating discomfort as an emergency, fear loses its urgency. Anxiety feeds on avoidance. Stoic endurance starves it. Each time you remain steady under pressure, your confidence becomes grounded in evidence, not affirmation. Eventually, you stop asking life to be easier. You start asking yourself to be stronger, clearer, and more disciplined. This shift doesn't harden you, it stabilizes you. You still feel joy, grief, love, and loss, but they pass through you instead of consuming you. Emotion becomes a visitor, not a ruler. And once this internal order takes shape, the external world loses much of its power over you. Opinions feel lighter, setbacks feel instructional, silence feels comfortable. You begin to realize that mental strength was never about dominance, it was about self-command. Most people spend their lives trying to feel in control, without realizing that control is not something you chase, it's something you practice internally. You don't gain control by forcing outcomes, correcting others, or predicting the future. You gain it by refusing to let your inner state be hijacked by every external disturbance. Stoicism reframes control as self-governance. If you can govern your impulses, your interpretations, and your reactions, you already possess more power than someone who dominates their environment but cannot master their mind. There's a subtle moment when mental strength begins to replace mental noise. You notice fewer internal arguments, fewer emotional spikes, fewer urges to explain yourself. Silence becomes less threatening because you no longer need constant affirmation to feel grounded. This is when many realize how exhausting their previous mental habits were, how much energy was wasted proving, defending, replaying, and justifying. Stoicism doesn't give you more energy, it stops you from leaking it. One of the most difficult truths to accept is that clarity often comes with emotional loneliness. When you stop feeding drama, you stop being entertained by it. When you stop reacting, you stop being stimulating to those who thrive on emotional exchange. Stoicism prepares you for this reality without bitterness. It teaches that not all distance is loss. Sometimes it's alignment. Sometimes it's the cost of mental order. As discipline deepens, you begin to notice how much of modern anxiety comes from artificial urgency. Everything feels immediate. Everything demands response. Stoicism remembers what truly matters by shrinking the timeline back to the present moment. Not tomorrow's worries, not yesterday's regrets, just now. What action is required? What response is appropriate? What principle applies? This narrowing of focus doesn't limit your life, it steadies it. There's a powerful shift that occurs when you stop seeking emotional relief and start seeking emotional accuracy. Relief is temporary, accuracy is stabilizing. Stoicism asks you to see situations as they are, not as your fear or hope paints them. When perception becomes accurate, reactions become proportional. You stop overreacting to minor disruptions and under-responding to serious issues. Your emotional scale recalibrates. Most people unknowingly train themselves to be fragile by avoiding discomfort at all costs. Every escape reinforces the belief that discomfort is intolerable. Stoic endurance breaks this loop. Each time you remain present through discomfort, without numbing, avoiding, or dramatizing, it rewires your confidence. You no longer hope you can handle pressure. You know you can. Over time, the mind becomes less cluttered by imaginary futures. Anxiety thrives in prediction. Stoicism starves it by anchoring attention in preparation instead of speculation. You don't ask what might go wrong. You ask what you'll do if it does. This subtle difference shifts you from helplessness to readiness, from fear to composure. Eventually, you notice that emotional highs lose their grip just as much as emotional lows. You stop chasing intensity. You stop mistaking stimulation for fulfillment. Stoic calm doesn't flatten life. It deepens it. Joy becomes quieter but more stable. Satisfaction becomes less dependent on circumstance. You don't feel less. You feel cleaner. Another realization emerges quietly. Many of your old worries were never problems to solve, only sensations to endure. Once endured, they dissolve. Stoicism teaches patience, not as passive waiting, but as active endurance, the willingness to stay steady while time does its work. And time, when not resisted, resolves far more than force ever could. As this mindset settles in, the external world doesn't change, but your relationship to it does. You stop demanding fairness. You stop expecting consistency from chaos. You stop confusing hardship with injustice. This acceptance doesn't make you weak. It makes you unshakable. You no longer waste energy arguing with reality. At some point, you realize that mental strength is not dramatic. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels grounded, ordinary, reliable. You wake up less reactive. You move through challenges with less internal friction. You stop waiting for life to give you permission to be calm. And once that happens, something irreversible begins. Most people never realize the moment they cross a threshold, from managing their emotions to being governed by them. It happens quietly, through repetition. Reacting becomes a habit. Avoidance becomes comfort. Distraction becomes identity. Stoicism interrupts this cycle by demanding awareness where autopilot once lived. It teaches you to notice the instant a feeling arises, not to suppress it, but to prevent it from deciding your behavior. That moment of awareness is small, almost invisible, but it's where freedom begins. There is a strange discomfort that appears when you stop narrating your pain to yourself. At first, it feels like something is missing. The mind is used to storytelling, turning setbacks into identity, mistakes into labels, emotions into permanent states. Stoicism removes the narration and leaves only facts. This can feel cold, but it's actually cleansing. Without constant interpretation, events lose their emotional weight faster than expected. What once haunted you becomes information. What once defined you becomes experience. Many people believe confidence comes from certainty. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Confidence comes from adaptability. When you no longer need guarantees to move forward, fear loses leverage. You stop waiting for clarity before acting. You act according to principle, then adjust as reality responds. This flexibility is what allows stoic-minded people to remain calm while others panic. They are not rigid. They are grounded. There's a moment when you realize how often you used emotional reactions as a substitute for action. Anger replaced boundaries. Worry replaced preparation. Rumination replaced decision. Stoicism exposes this substitution without judgment. It simply asks, what action is required right now? Not what feels justified. Not what relieves tension temporarily. What actually moves you forward? This question cuts through mental noise with surgical precision. As this discipline strengthens, you begin to trust yourself differently. Not because life becomes predictable, but because your response becomes reliable. You no longer fear emotional collapse because you've seen yourself remain steady before. You no longer fear discomfort because you've endured it without breaking. This trust is earned, not affirmed. And once earned, it doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Most people unknowingly live as if their inner peace is rented, temporarily granted by good days and revoked by bad ones. Stoicism teaches ownership. Peace becomes something you carry, not something you borrow. It isn't dependent on outcomes, approval, or comfort. It's the result of alignment between values and behavior. When that alignment holds, external chaos loses its authority. Eventually, you stop seeking emotional safety in people, routines, or environments. You stop expecting others to regulate your mood or validate your worth. This independence can feel isolating at first, but it's also empowering. You are no longer emotionally negotiable. Your standards don't shift to preserve harmony. Your calm doesn't collapse under pressure. There's a point where restraint becomes instinct. You don't need to remind yourself to pause. It happens naturally. You don't rehearse patience. It emerges. The mind, once chaotic, becomes ordered through repetition. This is not suppression. It's refinement. Emotion still exists, but it no longer floods your decisions. And then something subtle but profound takes place. You stop fearing your own mind. Silence no longer feels dangerous. Stillness no longer feels empty. You are no longer at war with your thoughts. You are above them. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement without entanglement. Most people never realize how much of their suffering comes from internal resistance rather than external hardship. They argue silently with reality all day long, wishing things were different, replaying what should have happened, imagining how others should behave. Stoicism ends that internal war by removing the need to win arguments against life. When resistance dissolves, energy returns. Not because life became easier, but because you stopped exhausting yourself, fighting what already exists. There is a quiet strength that forms when you stop explaining yourself. At first, this feels uncomfortable, almost irresponsible, because modern culture trains you to justify every boundary and defend every decision. Stoicism teaches that explanation is optional when your values are clear. You don't owe everyone access to your reasoning. Silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes a form of self-respect. And the less you explain, the less you invite interference. Many people fear losing control, but what they're actually afraid of is losing emotional comfort. Stoicism asks you to separate the two. Comfort is fleeting. Control is internal. When you stop prioritizing comfort, fear weakens. You become willing to endure temporary unease in exchange for long-term stability. This trade-off is where discipline is born, not through force, but through clarity of what truly matters. As this mindset deepens, you start noticing how often people confuse urgency with importance. Every message, every conflict, every opinion arrives demanding immediate reaction. Stoic calm disrupts this cycle. You slow the pace, not because you're indifferent, but because you're selective. You understand that responding later with clarity is more powerful than reacting now with emotion. There is a subtle shift that happens when you stop seeking emotional certainty from the future. Most anxiety lives in imagined outcomes that never arrive. Stoicism grounds you in preparation instead of prediction. You don't rehearse fear, you rehearse readiness. You don't ask how to avoid hardship, you ask how to meet it with composure. This reframing changes how the future feels. It becomes unknown, not threatening. Over time, your relationship with failure transforms. Failure stops feeling like exposure and starts feeling like feedback. Ego weakens, curiosity strengthens. You're no longer trying to protect an image, you're refining a process. Stoicism strips away the fear of looking flawed because growth requires friction. And once friction is expected, it loses its emotional sting. Many people underestimate how much peace comes from lowered expectations of others. Not lowered standards, lowered expectations. Stoicism teaches you to hold yourself to principle while allowing others to be imperfect without resentment. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You respond appropriately instead of emotionally. You correct when needed. You walk away when required. You no longer demand emotional maturity from those who haven't developed it. As mental order increases, you notice something surprising. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. Boredom loses its threat. Silence becomes restorative. You become comfortable with your own presence. This is rare in a world addicted to distraction. And this comfort with yourself becomes an anchor when everything else feels unstable. There's also a moment when you realize how much of your old identity was built around reaction. Being the one who felt deeply, cared intensely, responded passionately. Stoicism doesn't erase depth. It refines it. Emotion becomes quieter but more durable. You care without collapsing. You engage without losing yourself. You feel without drowning. Eventually, external validation loses its grip. Praise feels pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism feels informative but not personal. Your sense of worth becomes internally referenced. This doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you steady. You stop negotiating your self-respect based on others' moods. And once that internal steadiness takes root, something fundamental shifts. You stop trying to escape life's weight. You learn how to carry it, calmly, deliberately, without complaint. Most people never notice how much of their identity is built around avoidance. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding silence, avoiding responsibility for their inner state. Stoicism dismantles avoidance by teaching a simple but unsettling truth. What you avoid controls you. The moment you stop running from discomfort, it loses authority. Pain no longer chases you. Fear no longer dictates your behavior. You realize that most of what you were avoiding was not dangerous, just unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity, once faced, becomes neutral. There is a quiet courage that forms when you stop trying to be understood. When you release the need for others to validate your experience, your thoughts, your decisions, you reclaim enormous mental space. Stoicism teaches that misunderstanding is not a threat to truth. You can be misunderstood and still be correct. You can be unseen and still be grounded. This realization strips away the exhausting need to constantly clarify who you are. At some point, you begin to notice how often people confuse emotional honesty with emotional impulsiveness. Stoicism draws a sharp line between the two. Honesty is clarity. Impulsiveness is leakage. When emotion spills without intention, it weakens communication. When emotion is restrained and precise, it carries weight. This is why calm words spoken at the right moment often land harder than loud reactions ever could. As mental discipline deepens, you stop narrating your life as a struggle and start seeing it as a sequence of responsibilities. Not burdens, responsibilities. What needs to be done, what needs to be endured, what needs to be released. This shift removes drama without removing meaning. Life becomes less theatrical, but more real, less overwhelming, but more deliberate. Most people don't realize how addicted they are to emotional highs and lows. They mistake intensity for aliveness. Stoicism slowly weans you off this dependency. Your emotional range becomes steadier, less extreme, but your perception becomes sharper. You notice subtleties you once missed. You experience moments fully without needing them to peak. This steadiness doesn't dull life, it clarifies it. There is also a moment when you realize that peace doesn't feel like happiness. It feels like absence. Absence of inner conflict, absence of unnecessary tension, absence of self-betrayal. At first, this can feel strange, even empty, because chaos was familiar. But over time, this absence becomes spacious. You think more clearly. You act more cleanly. You waste less time negotiating with yourself. Stoicism also forces a reckoning with time. You begin to feel how limited it is. Not in a fearful way, but in a clarifying way. You stop spending mental energy on people, thoughts, and situations that don't align with your values. This selectivity is not cruelty, it's respect for the finite nature of your attention. When time becomes precious, trivial conflicts lose relevance. As this mindset solidifies, you notice how much of society runs on emotional contagion, outrage cycles, fear narratives, endless comparison. Stoic calm makes you immune to most of it, not disconnected, but insulated. You observe without absorbing. You stay informed without being inflamed. This alone gives you an advantage few people possess. Eventually, the question, "How do I feel about this?" is replaced with, "What is the right response?" Emotion becomes data, not direction. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you accurate. You still feel, but feeling no longer drives the wheel. And then something profound settles in. You stop waiting for life to slow down. You stop asking circumstances to cooperate. You stop hoping for relief. You realize that stability was never outside you. It was always something you were meant to build. Most people spend their lives preparing for a version of life that never arrives. They wait for the right mood, the right timing, the right circumstances to finally feel grounded. Stoicism dismantles this waiting by confronting a hard truth. Life is already happening, and it will not pause until you feel ready. When you stop postponing inner order, you stop living on standby. You act from who you are now, not who you hope to become once things calm down. There is a moment when you realize that many of your past struggles were amplified by resistance rather than difficulty. You weren't crushed by events. You were worn down by the constant internal commentary surrounding them. Stoicism teaches you to remove the commentary and deal directly with reality. Without mental embellishment, even heavy situations feel lighter. Not easy, but manageable. And manageability is enough. As you grow steadier, you begin to see how rare emotional restraint truly is. In a world where outrage is currency and vulnerability is often performative, quiet composure becomes almost invisible. Yet this invisibility is power. When you no longer broadcast your inner state, others lose access to it. Your calm becomes private. Your resilience becomes internal. You are no longer easily influenced because there's less surface area to manipulate. Many people assume that letting go means giving up. Stoicism reveals the opposite. Letting go is precision. You release what drains you so you can fully engage with what matters. You stop pouring energy into arguments that don't move your life forward. You stop carrying resentment that offers no return. You stop revisiting decisions that can no longer be changed. This selective disengagement is not apathy, it's focus. There's also a quiet grief that can emerge as clarity sharpens. You see how much time was spent reacting instead of building. How many moments were lost to worry instead of action. Stoicism doesn't allow you to linger here. It acknowledges the loss, then redirects you forward. Regret becomes instruction, not punishment. The past becomes a teacher, not a courtroom. Eventually, you notice that you no longer crave reassurance the way you once did. You don't need constant feedback to confirm your direction. Silence doesn't feel like rejection. It feels neutral. You trust your internal compass because it's been tested under pressure. This trust replaces anxiety with steadiness. You don't need to know how everything will unfold. You know how you will respond. At some point, you stop seeing challenges as interruptions and start seeing them as the terrain. Life is not something that occasionally becomes difficult. It is difficulty shaped by meaning. Stoicism doesn't promise escape from this reality. It prepares you to move through it with dignity intact. When dignity becomes your anchor, circumstances lose their power to humiliate or destabilize you. You also begin to notice how little control others actually have over you once your reactions are disciplined. Insults lose their bite. Praise loses its grip. Manipulation becomes obvious. You are no longer emotionally available to chaos. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you self-possessed. You choose engagement instead of being pulled into it. And then, quietly, without ceremony, you realize something important. You are no longer fighting yourself. The inner friction that once drained you has eased. Your thoughts align more closely with your actions. Your values guide your choices. This alignment creates a sense of internal coherence that no external achievement can replicate. This is not the end of the journey. It's the point where something new begins. Most people will hear ideas like these and feel inspired for a moment, then return to the same habits that keep them restless, reactive, and quietly defeated. But if you've stayed until now, something in you already knows this isn't just motivation. It's a line being drawn. Stoicism isn't a philosophy you admire. It's a standard you live by. It asks you to stop outsourcing your stability, stop negotiating with your impulses, and stop waiting for the world to change before you do. From this point forward, calm becomes a decision, discipline becomes a daily act, and strength becomes something you practice when no one is watching. If this message sharpened your thinking, like this video, share it with someone who needs mental clarity and subscribe to PsychoVest, because this channel isn't about escaping life's pressure, it's about becoming the kind of mind that can carry it.